So I wanted to start by talking with you a little bit about my own reinvention story. Because, of course, if you write a book about professional reinvention, in my case, I interviewed dozens and dozens of executives who had reinvented themselves to learn about their best practices and what their experiences were. But the initial interest that I had in the topic started from my own experience. My very first job after I finished graduate school was as a newspaper reporter. I was a political writer for the Boston Phoenix, this newspaper, and in fact, this is my very first cover story. I'm down, below the fold, but nonetheless, my story made it onto the cover. I probably have about 20 copies in my attic saved of this paper. And it was a great job, for anyone who's interested in, getting to go to all kinds of events and ask people questions and write. It was really wonderful. But about a year into my career as a journalist, I got a call one day, a very innocent call, from the HR department at our newspaper. And they said, "Oh, Dorie, would you mind stopping by the office before the end of the day?" And you are probably a little savvier than I was when I was 22 years old. But I thought, well, maybe they're changing our dental plan. Maybe there's something I need to sign. But in fact, that was not the case. And when I left the office, I had lost my job. It was just the start of the wave of layoffs that would later come to characterize the news industry. And in fact, between 2000 and 2009, nearly 40% of American newsroom journalists lost their jobs. And unluckily, I was in the vanguard. So it was a Monday afternoon. And all my colleagues were streaming past to leave for the day, and I had to go back to my desk and pack up. But so that was pretty hard. That was pretty sad to lose my first job. And things managed to get, unfortunately, a little worse the next morning when I woke up because I had been laid off, it turns out, on September 10th, 2001. And the next morning, I woke up to a terrorist attack. And for the next 2 weeks, our entire economy was stopped. The stock market stopped trading. Planes stopped flying. And we didn't know if this was a one-time thing or if it was always going to be this way, that we were going to be subjected to more and more attacks. Nobody knew. And so it began to be a little concerning for many reasons, but I began to really wonder, how am I ever going to find another job in the midst of this? So I started freelancing as a journalist for a while. That was good. I liked the entrepreneurial spirit of it, but what I really wanted most was a job at our regional daily newspaper, the Boston Globe. And so I kept hoping that they would hire me on, and I was, writing pieces for them, and they said, "Oh, Dorie, we love you, but they had a hiring freeze. They weren't permitted to hire anyone, and they said, "Well, can you just keep waiting? We'll hire you eventually." That's always good when they say that. But so I actually, a few months into this, of freelancing and really trying to scrape by just making a living, I got a phone call from a gentleman that I had first met when I used to interview him. He was kind of one of my sources when I was a reporter. He was a political consultant. And he called me up. He knew I had lost my job. And he said, "Dorie, I'm doing consulting for a candidate who's running for governor. Would you be interested in being the press secretary?" And at first, I actually said to him, no, thank you, but I really want to stay a journalist. That's what I want to do. The Globe is going to hire me. And so I hung up the phone, and I thought about it. And about an hour later, I called him back. And I said, actually, yes, I would like to come in for an interview. And that was really the moment where I began to transition, where I began to realize sometimes the plans that we craft for ourselves, sometimes the vision that we have for our future, through no fault of our own, but through changes in society, through changes in the economy, it doesn't always work. And if we want to really be able to be flexible, if we don't want to look like this every day, we need to have a plan B, and we need to be comfortable exercising that. Even in the United States, believe it or not, there are plenty of people who worry about personal branding. I mean, for me, personal branding is the way to bridge the gap, to make sure that other people really understand who we are, what we're capable of. But literally, even the term, sometimes you say the term and people say, I don't want to be a brand. I'm not a tub of toothpaste or detergent. I don't want to be sold like that. Why do I have to do it? And it gets very frustrating for them because they feel like they don't want to be boxed into some kind of fake, salesy, inauthentic thing, which I understand, because that actually is not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about when I talk about one's personal brand is something quite different. The term, just to take a little step back for a moment, the term personal branding came to prominence in 1997. 1997. That was like the hardest part of French I had to learn. It's like, why does it take me 3 minutes to say the year? But I got it. Once we hit 2000, it was a lot easier. But so 1997, Tom Peters, some of you may know his work. He's a great American management strategist. He was the author in the 1980s of the big bestseller In Search of Excellence. And so in 1997, he did this Fast Company cover story called The Brand Called You. And that really inaugurated the era of people talking about personal branding as a concept. But what I will say to you is that even if the terminology is relatively recent, the concept has been around for millennia. Because fundamentally, when we talk about personal brand, it is a synonym for your reputation. That's literally what it is. What do people say about you when you leave the room? Is it what you would wish that they would say about you? There's a lot of professionals who say, "Oh, I don't have a personal brand. I don't want to deal with my personal brand." But everybody does have one because everybody has a reputation. People think something about you. So the question is, does it match what you want? And if it doesn't, if you care about your career, if you care about your professional life, it's probably a good idea to try to take steps to close that gap. That's what we're talking about. This is not about inauthenticity. This is not about, let's stick my finger to the wind and try to see what I think the world wants and then pretend to be that. On the contrary, it is actually about getting clear on who you are, what you can contribute, and then making sure that people really grasp that. That's what we're talking about. But one of the places where we often fall down, one of the places where we often encounter difficulties in reinventing ourselves is in how we tell that story of it. People ask me sometimes, where's the biggest problem? And it's usually here, because we assume that when we're making a reinvention, other people are going to get it. Oh, sure, they'll be able to connect the dots. Well, I used to do this, and so now I do this, right? Obvious. But because, as we were talking about earlier, it is, people they have 1,000 Facebook friends. I mean, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Viadeo, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. There's too much information coming at us. People are not taking the time to think about the question, oh, so he used to do that, but now he wants to do this. Huh, oh, okay. They're not soaking it in. It might make sense to you, but unless you connect the dots for them, they are probably not going to be able to make sense of it themselves. They'll say, oh, that's weird, okay. And, it'll go out of their heads. But these are the people. I mean, here's the thing. If you want to be successful in your reinvention, you've got to bring people along with you, because it's your current network, ironically, that, number one, it's the people that you know now that are most essential to you, because they're the people that can help you get new clients, help you get introductions, meet the people you need to meet. They will allow you to flourish in your reinvention. But number two, the challenge is that the people you know now are the ones who are probably going to be most skeptical of your reinvention, right? You go to an event, right? We have a cocktail reception out there. If you go out there tonight, I guarantee you, and I go up and I shake somebody's hand and I say, hi, you know, blah, 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 nice to meet you. I'm an executive coach. And they'll say, oh, great, nice, tell me about that. No one is going to say, no, you're not. But if you try the same thing on your cousin, your former business colleague, your old college buddy, they'll probably say, what do you know about that? Why are you doing that? That's crazy. What about your other job was so secure? Why do you want to try this other thing? And they think they're being helpful. But we need them. We need those people. And so we have to learn to tell the story in a way that they get, so that they're willing to come on board and willing to help us. And so the power of narrative, I wanted to quickly tell you the story of a woman named Libby Wagner, who I profiled in my book. Libby, actually, she's maybe, you could call her the mirror image of Joanne Chang. Libby Wagner was not a management consultant who decided to give it all up and become a chef. Libby Wagner was a poet who decided to give it all up and become a management consultant. Which is pretty great. But partly a challenge for her, as you might well imagine, was the fact that when she started, she was extremely nervous. She was extremely embarrassed about her past, because she thought that if people in the business world knew that she had trained as a poet, that she had an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, that she had published 3 books of poetry, that they would not take her seriously as a business consultant. And so at first she hid. She wouldn't tell people that she was a poet. But that meant that she actually didn't have a lot to tell. And so she kind of came off as a bland management consultant. That's not too helpful. So over time, though, as she got more and more comfortable, she realized, you know what, it's about results. It's not about your past. It's not about having to have this mandatory set of credentials. Where I've come from actually can be a source of strength. And so she began to come out as a poet. And today she has an email newsletter called The Boardroom Poet. That's her Twitter handle too, @BoardroomPoet. And she's actually made language be a cornerstone of her business. Because if you think about it, it turns out that there actually are some real advantages to hiring a poet. If you are trying to communicate with your stakeholders, with your employees, with your best customers, and craft a message that will resonate with them, you might want to hire someone who has spent their life figuring out the nuances of language and what really resonates. So what I have taken from this story, what I will suggest to you, is that sometimes the thing that we're most embarrassed about, the thing that we might think is a weakness, oh, I don't have an MBA, I'm a poet. Well, why will anyone listen to me? That ostensible source of weakness may actually be your strength. You just have to think about how to flip the coin around. What is on the other side of the coin? And how can that actually be a strength that you lead with? I wanted to make sure that I left you with some tangible options, some tangible possibilities that hopefully can enhance your experience. So, number one, most critically, I didn't want to disgrace my countrymen, so I figured I have to have a Top Gun slide. So, some of you may be familiar with the concept of the wingman. In a very literal sense, a wingman, if you've seen Top Gun, Tom Cruise is the fighter pilot, and there's his buddy over there, Anthony Edwards. If you are a fighter pilot, you have people shooting at you. And if you want to make sure that your plane does not go down, You need a friend. You need a trusted friend who is flying next to you and taking out the bad guys before they can hurt you. You need someone who is watching your back. In a very metaphorical sense, that's what we all need in business. And some of us, casually, unconsciously, have developed it. I will ask you to think, to consider consciously developing a wingman. And here's what I mean by it. There's research that's been done by two of my favorite academics, Robert Cialdini from Arizona State University and Jeffrey Pfeffer from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And they've discovered two things, one of which we all know, the second of which very few of us know. The first thing that we all know is that if you are perceived by other people as being a braggart, as being someone who is overly self-promotional, they will not like you. They will not listen to you. We all know that. But number two, far less well known, if someone else says those same positive things about you, people will think you're amazing. So we could wait, and maybe we'll get lucky, and someone will say something nice about us to the right person, and that would be awesome. We love it when that happens. But I'll suggest that we don't have to wait. If you have a wingman, you could do this tonight. Go to a trusted friend or colleague, someone that you like and respect and would not yourself hesitate to recommend. And you say, at the next networking event, at the next conference, I will talk you up if you talk me up. You make a pact. And this is going out to those of you in the room who feel uncomfortable, who feel a little nervous, a little queasy about the idea of personal branding. Because if you are nervous about this, this is for you. You are not doing any self-promotion. You are helping shine a light on your friend, which is probably, hopefully, what you want to be doing anyway as a good friend. Looking for opportunities to help raise awareness about great attributes your friend has, recent projects, recent awards. Oh, you know, my friend Daniela is she's too polite to tell you this, but let me just tell you about the great things. You do that. You have a wingman, and all of a sudden people take note. Oh, I didn't know that. That's so interesting. Tell me more. Wingmen can be tremendously powerful. So tip number two, citing a little bit more academic research because you are an academic crowd here, you HEC superstars and Triumph superstars. Ronald Burt is a sociologist at the University of Chicago, and he has done research into the nature of networks. And what he discovered, perhaps you know this from your own personal experience, is that in literally almost every organization, this is basically human nature, there are silos. There are gaps between people in communication. This department doesn't talk to that department. This field office doesn't talk to that field office. Headquarters doesn't talk to anyone. There are gaps. But in the gaps lies opportunity. Because if you can be the person who is the dot in the center, if you are the person who bridges those gaps, you can make yourself invaluable. Because you will have access to knowledge and information and best practices that other people do not. And, you know, you may listen and say, okay, I get the idea, but doesn't that sound complicated? How do I bridge structural holes? But it actually, interestingly, is not that complicated. Probably my favorite example of this is I have a friend who worked at a large research hospital. You know, 1 million branches, 1 million employees. It would be impossible to get to know every piece of this organization. And it was, in fact, very siloed. But she made a pact with herself. She said, every week 1 hour a week, I am going to ask a different person from a different department to lunch. That's all she did. But if you think about this, in your own life, the difference that it would make at the end of a year to have 50 new contacts throughout your organization, 50 new people, where if you needed to get something done and there was some inexplicable holdup, you could call someone and say, hey, what's going on over there? Who should I talk to? And you get the wheel greased. 50 new people where if there's a problem, a barrier, a blockage, you can call them and say, well, what did you do? You seem to work this out. Can I borrow that? If you do that, that is how you become known throughout the organization, build connections throughout the organization, and become invaluable to your organization. That's number 2. Number 3, success as epitomized by a man with his dog and his Bentley. This is Alan Weiss. He is a consultant in Rhode Island, and I interviewed him for Reinventing You because he told a really fascinating story that I think, for me, was very illuminating. For all of you. I mean, we all, from the time we were little, have been told that it is a good thing, it is a valuable thing to have leadership roles, to be a leader, to take on leadership positions. We all know this. But the trouble is, we don't always know why. And Alan Weiss's example shows why. In the mid-1990s, so 20 years ago now, Alan Weiss was the New England chapter president, a regional chapter president of the National Speakers Association. So this is the group for professional speakers. And this is a volunteer position. And when he decided to take it on, he figured that he would probably make less money in the years that he was going to be president, which makes sense because he's a solo consultant, right? So if you're spending more of your time volunteering, you're probably spending less of your time marketing. You're probably spending less of your time servicing clients. So he figured, all right, I'll probably take a little bit of a hit, but I'm okay with that. I'll have a good experience. I'll learn some things. I'll meet interesting people. I will do it anyway. What he learned, on the contrary, however, was that during those 2 years that Alan Weiss was the regional chapter president of the National Speakers Association, he earned an additional $250,000. Maybe, what is this, 175,000 extra euros 20 years ago? Directly from his role as being the regional chapter president. The reason for this, he learned, is that if a reporter wants to talk to anyone in the group, they want to talk to the president. If someone can't take a job and they need to refer it to someone, they refer it to the president. There is a power in leadership that comes from a psychology concept known as social proof. Social proof basically says that as humans, we look to other humans to figure out how we should behave in a given situation. If I'm, if me and my friend are staring up at the sky for no reason, you walk in, you're probably going to say, what's going on? And you're going to stare up at the sky too, even if I am doing it merely to trick you. As humans, we look to other people. And if you are a leader, if you are the elected leader of an organization, your peers have endorsed you. With that social proof, people say, oh, he must be good. Sure, I'll send the business to him. And it dramatically accelerated his success, both financial and otherwise, even though he was spending less time with clients, even though he was spending less time marketing. And so the upshot of this, if you want to establish a powerful brand as a leader, if you really want to reinvent yourself into a new identity, don't join 10 groups and say, oh, well, I can meet so many more people if I'm in 10 groups. Join 2 groups and become a leader in those groups. Invest your time, because there's certainly more work if you are the leader of a group compared to being a garden variety member. But there is exponentially more benefit to being the leader of those groups. There is a power in being the person at the front of the room rather than the person in the back of the room whispering and trading cards. Become a leader. Focus and take the reins. Number 4. This is a gentleman named Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's kind of big in the U.S. And what I like about his story, he is the son. You know, he did not come from great privilege. His family immigrated from Russia. His father owned a liquor store and in New Jersey. And so in the late 1990s, his family goes to Gary, says, "Gary, you're young. You should know about this internet thing, right? We want you to help us figure out how to sell wine and alcohol online. Can you help us do that?" And so he said, okay. So he took it on. And at first, he thought about becoming a blogger, you know, writing up blogs, because that was the really common thing to do at the time. But he wasn't a writer. He hated writing. You know, some of us love it, some of us hate it. And he said, oh no, this would be terrible. I can't force myself to do this. But he thought about what his strengths were, and he was a good talker. He loved telling stories. He loved talking about wine. And so he decided to create a video blog. So every day he would film a 30-minute episode, which is pretty long for the internet, 30-minute episode of a show called Wine Library TV. At its peak, Wine Library TV had 100,000 daily viewers and became so successful. Gary Vaynerchuk broke through and basically became a public celebrity. He was on all the big TV shows in the U.S. He got signed to a multi-million-dollar 10-book contract because he was so well regarded as a social media savant. He has subsequently, in fact, he's done so well, he reinvented himself from being a wine salesman working for his family's business to being a social media consultant. He has a 300-person agency doing it now. Now, why does this matter? How does this relate to you? The way that I will argue that it relates is that these days, you know, we're all knowledge workers, right? We are people who deal with ideas. And the trouble with that is that unlike if you were an artist or if you were a cabinet maker, there is not usually a tangible thing that people can look at to say, oh, that's wonderful, you're really good. How do I know if you're a good marketer? How do I know if you're a good project manager? Unless I've worked with you directly, I probably don't know. And particularly in a place like Europe, a place like France, where it's a little tricky sometimes to get rid of people once you brought them on board, you don't really want to take a lot of risks. So the question for us is, how do you mitigate your employer's sense of risk? How do you make it feel safer for them to want to hire you? The internet is a very powerful way to do it. Because if you create content, whether it is written content, in Gary's case, it's video content. You could do podcasts, for audio content, literally. Video and audio, I mean, this used to be expensive. This used to be stuff, oh, I can't do that. That costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. No, you can do it now with your telephone, which is almost embarrassing how easy it is. You can become a video blogger or podcaster with your smartphone. Creating content, getting your ideas out there, is a way for people to test drive you. It is a way for them to learn how you think, to become more comfortable with who you are as a person. What do you like? What's your personality like? Would you be good to work with? Are you smart? Do you have interesting ideas? Do you have a good take on the issues of the day? Are you somebody who stays current with trends? Even if it's something, even if you say, oh, Dorie, I don't even want to create content. That's not my thing. Guess what? Even if you do something as simple as creating a Twitter feed where you don't even create anything of your own, you just retweet things that you think are interesting, even that investment of 5 minutes a day can be valuable for you because it shows in your curation that you are somebody who is following things, who's keeping up with the times, who knows about your industry, and who has a point of view. That can be a very powerful way to differentiate yourself. Fifth and finally, some of you may recognize this guy. Some of you have maybe even been to his shindigs. Klaus Schwab, head of the World Economic Forum. Now, Klaus Schwab, you may say to yourself, you know, where did he come from? How did he come to start something that has become such a cultural icon that you can get Angela Merkel and Angelina Jolie under the same roof? Not a lot of people can bring those folks together. Klaus Schwab has been able to do it. How did this happen? Was he a billionaire? Was he aristocracy, royalty? How did he do it? But Klaus Schwab was a business school professor. And 40 years ago, he asked a question. He said, wouldn't it be great if there were a conference that every year talked about the state of the European economy? And he tried it. He launched it. And over time, it became the thing that is now the World Economic Forum, the cultural phenomenon that is Davos. So it might seem a little far-fetched, a little bit of a stretch to say, well, okay, what do I have in common with Klaus Schwab? Where are you going with this story? But I will say to you that there is power in starting something. It doesn't have to become Davos tomorrow, but there is power in being a founder. There is power in starting something. And I will tell you the story, as we conclude, of my friend Robbie. This is Robbie Samuels. He lives in Boston. And Robbie, like many people before him, noticed that in the nonprofit community, just as Ronald Burt predicted, there are silos. People were not talking to each other. Different types of organizations were not talking to each other, even though there was so much that they could learn from each other. They could share best practices. They could avoid reinventing the wheel. But they were too busy. Too many meetings, just didn't do it. So he said, well, how do I solve this? What do I do? And he realized that if he wanted to bring people together, he would have to create something fun, something that people would actually want to do. And so he launched a club, an organization, free. He called it Socializing for Justice. And every week he would send out notices. And a couple of times a month, they would have events, free events. Bowling for justice, cocktails for justice, trivia night for justice. And the goal was to bring together nonprofit advocates and their friends just to have fun. But in the process of having fun, they were able to meet each other. They were able to make friends. They were able to start dating. And in the process of doing that, it broke down the silos. And in a roundabout kind of way, by osmosis, it broke the silos and it strengthened the nonprofit community. And so Robbie became an organizer. He became a convener. And for the past 8 years, he has run this organization. It now has 2,500 members. And so I ask you, if you had 2,500 people in your community, peers in your field, in your region, who knew your name, who had come to your events, and who knew every week they would get a message talking about all the cool things that you were helping to organize on their behalf so that they could meet people and have a good time, what would that do? You have to give before you get. And Robbie has been doing that for 8 years, helping to add value to other people and to build a stronger community. And so today, if Robbie needed anything, if he needed a job, if he needed connections, if he needed introductions, you have 2,500 people that would be fighting with each other to try to help him because he has deposited goodwill into that favor bank. If you want to build a powerful brand, if you want to build a network, if you want to be known for something, start something. And you are absolutely known for that. What you start becomes your brand. So those are 5 strategies. Hopefully some, at least, will appeal to you. And I hope you'll be able to try them out and start and begin to make a difference and really take control of your personal brand and of your reinvention. Because we all, these days, need to reinvent ourselves. As Stephen Rice said from Juniper Networks, it doesn't have to be a huge reinvention. It's not that we all have to change careers, although some of us might want to. But even if you love where you are today, even if you're in exactly the right place, the world is moving fast enough that if you stay still, you will fall behind. We need to reinvent ourselves every day in small ways so that we can stay in front of the curve and keep succeeding. And that's my hope for you. So thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thanks.